Welcome everybody to another Product Tank. My name is Lucas Latour and I'm the host. If you're not super familiar with Product Tank, it is a meetup for people in product managers. It's part of the organization Mind the Product. And part of what we do is we like to bring in people who are experienced experts in product and sort of pick their brain and ask some of their thoughts on product and things in general related to product. So tonight our guest is Derek Dehart, and Derek is the director of product at battleface. If you're not familiar with battleface, it's probably because they just recently moved to Columbus. They're an insurtech startup. I think they've raised like $12 million. And Derek has a really long history of just, working in product, leading product. So it's going to be really interesting to dive into some of his experiences. So Derek, welcome to Product Tank. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, thanks for having me. You mentioned something about experienced product leaders, so I don't actually know what I'm doing here, but see how it goes.
Yeah, no, you're definitely selling yourself short, man. I think people look to you a lot in the community for your expertise around product, and I'm really excited to dive in. One of the things I noticed about you, and it's actually one of the things that we have in common, funny enough, is that we were both philosophy majors in undergrad. It's very rare for me to encounter a fellow philosophy major. So I always have to ask, how did you, survive in the world, given that the expectation is for philosophy majors that they won't ever do anything?
Well, I definitely never did anything related to philosophy. That's for sure.
That's good.
At least directly related to the academics of philosophy. I actually think that a philosophy background serves me well in product. And we can get into that a little bit later if you're interested. But a lot of the truth seeking that we engage in product, I think lines up very well with epistemology and how we know to be true what we think is true. But in any case, I mean, my path to product is actually super boring and unrelated to my philosophy undergrad. It was a circuitous route into product, much like a lot of folks in the Midwest. I actually led contact centers. Like I was in the contact center industry for something like a decade, and then shifted into working for a startup that was doing contact center software. And I actually joined them as their director of client services. It wasn't even a product role. But because of my domain expertise working in contact centers, as the company grew up and they developed product as a practice and opened up roles, I was like, hey, I would really like to work with software engineers and help bring stuff to life. And so I slid into it, and I've never looked back since.
That's awesome, man. So just what initially sort of drew you into the product space? Like what gets you excited or interested in product in general?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's really about, for me, it's really about solving problems and solving real problems in a way that's valuable. I myself am not smart enough to be a software engineer, but I love technology. And so having the pleasure to work with brilliant technologists to bring things to life in ways that observably change the world is just an incredibly satisfying pursuit for me.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I feel like you're sort of in the insure tech space. Columbus is an insure tech town,
It is.
and somehow you've carved out sort of like expertise in sort of the insurance world. I guess how did you sort of find inroads into that?
It was an accident, just like a lot of other stuff. So I interestingly enough, back in 2017, I saw Dan Mangus speak at Startup Grind, which I think you also host these days. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I host a number of things.
that's right. But before seeing Dan speak at Startup Grind in 2017, there is no way that you could have convinced me that I would ever have ended up landing in car insurance. So for anyone who doesn't know, Dan is one of the founders. He's the CTO of Root Insurance, where I also worked in product. But the way that Dan articulated the problems in the space, the real modern human problems that exist within the car insurance industry, just resonated with me on such a visceral level. I was like, I have to check these guys out. I I would really love to help this team solve these problems. It took me about a year, of reaching out to them, going back and forth, but eventually I landed in Root Insurance. And the thing with Battleface, the travel insurance company, we're tackling a lot of the same problems in the industry that Root was tackling with car insurance. And so insurance as a thing, I think a lot of us prefer for insurance to be invisible, understandably, like you don't want to use it. But the kinds of problems that it solves on a deeply human level. And there's so many opportunities in the space to take this legacy vertical of insurance and make it more human, make it more relevant today, which is actually a pretty exciting proposition.
Yeah. So, since you mentioned Battleface, and I was thinking we would dive into Battleface a bit later, but I definitely think we should just go for it and start to talk about what Battleface is and kind of like what you're doing there. One of the interesting things about you is you've got the startup experience with things like Cover My Meds, Root Insurance, and now at Battleface. And so I'm curious, kind of like to start diving into that stuff. So just at a top high level, what is Battleface sort of doing?
So right now, Battleface is on a mission to create the most human-centered travel insurance company in the world. That's literally our mission statement. And what that means is, offering to folk, we're a global company, so we do a lot of business in the United Kingdom right now. We offer products throughout the European Union, in the United States, of course. But our product, what you can buy from Battleface, is travel insurance. The thing about travel insurance, especially in the United States, I don't know, I won't make anyone here raise their hands. I've never bought travel insurance. So I'm working for a travel insurance company and I've never purchased travel insurance. And that's because travel insurance in the United States as a product is, not to be cliche, but it's fundamentally broken. And it's an industry that has not served consumers well, primarily because it's been so tied to what I would call malicious incentive structures with, commissions associated with people distributing travel insurance, that it's really eroded the value to the United States consumer. As I've spoken with people who have purchased travel insurance or considered purchasing travel insurance, frankly, they think it's a scam. And given the traditional travel insurance industry, that's probably not too far off. But the team at Battleface, as I mentioned, we're on a mission to create a truly human-centered travel insurance company. We're going to change that, and we offer a product and we offer services in the United States it's priced in a way that's fair. It's not bloated through maligned incentive and commission structures. And where we really shine is the service that we provide to our customers. So. Succinctly, that's the product that you can buy. I think that what Battleface encapsulates, though, and what really excites me as a world traveler, someone with no small amount of wanderlust, is really we're in the business of protecting travelers. We're in the business of, if any of you go to Peru or France or Texas or Antarctica, that if you get into a bind, you can call Battleface and we'll help you out.
Yeah, it's interesting because like you said, I haven't traveled that much, so I haven't really had the occasion to get travel insurance, but I think it'd be useful to just paint the picture of like what are some of the like situations that might arise where you would need travel insurance. And it's interesting because there's a wide range based on what we talked about initially of what that could be, where that could be needed.
Yeah, and travel insurance as a product within the insurance industry is actually super interesting just because of the breadth and depth of what it could cover. So the obvious things that Americans tend to think about in the context of travel insurance are like if your flight gets canceled and there's a non-refundable portion of your flight, travel insurance will cover a portion of that non-refundable portion. There are also travel insurance products that cover delays. So if your trip gets disrupted because there was a flight delay or you miss a connection, there's a product for that. Probably more importantly is the travel medical component, which is If you're off skiing in the Alps, and hopefully this never happens to anybody, but if you break your leg and you need medical coverage, battleface does offer travel medical. It also offers a service called medical evacuation, meaning that if you are in, I don't want to be disparaging of any country, but let's say you go to a country and you don't trust their medical system.
Hmm.
Battleface has a product called medical evacuation, which will take you to the nearest country where you feel comfortable getting medical service. So all of these benefits associated with keeping you safe, and if something does happen, making sure you come out of the situation as best as you possibly can.
I feel like that's super interesting, and there's so many different possibilities. So I almost wonder like where you start. And I guess so you kind of came into the organization sort of with the mindset of sort of building out a product practice, right?
Yeah.
And part of this, the reason we want to meet up is we want to talk about kind of like startups and product, and is that different than big companies, and kind of like how you start to think about building out a product organization. So you've worked at several of these, and I'm wondering kind of what do you think makes a challenge unique for a startup when it comes to product versus what is unique about product for startups that compared to killing this question compared to like big companies?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, so we're a Series A startup.
Mm.
We're just past our seed round. Our Series A, it was, I think, in November or December of 2020. And so, as a Series A startup, we have a non-trivial risk of failure, right? Like that's basic math. That's not me saying anything about battleface. That's me saying something about Series A startups. And so when I think about product especially an early stage startup, frankly, what we're most focused on right now is how do we continue to survive? How do we continue to exist as a company? How do we make sure that we're on an effective growth trajectory so that we can continue to solve problems in the ways that we want to solve them? And the reason that I say that that's different from a larger, maybe more established company is that once you get to a certain size, once you get to a certain either funding level or you're cash flow positive or you're profitable, you then can think about the bets that you take a little bit differently. You can think about risks a little bit differently. And all organizations think about risk differently, but building out a product organization in an early stage startup is very much about thinking, what do we need to do right now to assure our survival in the short term, and what seeds do we need to start planting right now that are going to grow and cultivate over the next 3, 5, 10 years to create the sort of visionary company that we want, in this case, Battleface, to be.
Do you think that product managers are necessary for startups early on?
I think the product management is necessary for startups early on. The reason that I say it like that is because, I mean, you probably know tons of founders, Lucas, and lots of folks here probably know lots of founders. But founders do product management. If the founders don't do product management, someone does product management. I mean, in my mind, not to oversimplify it, but in my mind, product management is really all about decision quality. So making sure that you're making the best decision that you could possibly make given the available limited information right now. Someone's doing that in any organization. Whether they call it product management, whether they call that person a product manager, I'm not sure matters so much. I think that where there's value in bringing a product manager into a startup, especially an early stage startup, is when the founders recognize that's not a background or an expertise that they have, or frankly, if they don't have the capacity really to engage in the deep thought required in order to optimize for decision quality and learning. One of the things that I love about working at Battleface and love about working for the team at Battleface is that, like, the current executive team, they were completely upfront with me as we were talking about my joining the team. They were like, look, Derek, we know absolutely nothing about product management. We're not even quite sure, what you'll be doing tactically day over day. I was like, great, awesome. That sounds like a lot of fun. I can help. So, I think it just depends, really. If you need a product manager on the team.
That's super interesting. And I think, many people will come into an organization and there's already some sort of product practice in place, or or not, or none at all. And it seems like you're sort of architecting the whole thing. So like, where do you really start? Like, what are the fundamental things that you start to think about when you're trying to do this?
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. I mean, I kind of sometimes I refer to this as bare metal product. Like we're literally starting from the bedrock of what it means to be a product organization. And again, I'll probably end up sounding like a broken record tonight, but I love how humble the team has been so far in kind of giving me a lot of runway to figure out what makes sense. Because I think product in different organizations means different things, and different things make sense. But the the very first most important thing that I've found valuable, especially at battleface, has been getting all of the things that are locked up inside of the experts' heads and getting them out of their heads and figuring out how that translates into goals and the metrics that matter, and especially within an early stage startup, what the survival metrics are, so that you actually have things that you can calibrate toward and things that you can execute against. Because as everyone here probably knows, you can execute and execute and execute. You can execute your way out of existence unless you actually have a series of goals and targets and metrics that matter for the organization. So the very first really my very first focus was getting the existing team of experts, and they are experts in their fields, to externalize what it means to be a successful travel insurance company and really weave a story about, well, here's our North Star metric. This is how we serve our customers. Here's our survival metric. This is how we know that we're going to be around in the next 12 to 18 months. And here are all of the things that shake out of that ultimately translate into what we would call a product strategy, and eventually teams actually moving metrics that matter relative to those larger things.
So it's essentially knowing the product vision, the North Star, the business objectives, and that stuff, and making it really concrete and explicit, so that you can have something against which to compare like your performance or your direction.
It's that, and it's really catalyzing the organization to focus. Because again, I mean, something that you have to keep in mind when you're working with a group of founders is that they are doing product management. It's all locked up in their head. They know all of this stuff, and so laying it bare and writing it down, which I think is actually really important, writing it down so that it becomes real, actually provides this newfound focus for not just a product team or a team of engineers, but really the entire company. So it's helping people realize, we all need to be rowing the boat in the same direction. Well, here's that direction. And yes, there certainly is a component to that, which is performance management and making sure that I'm I guess earning my paycheck, for lack of a better term. But it's really about, what are we doing in the next week, the next 2 weeks, the next quarter, that's going to solve valuable problems for our customers, and how will we know that we're solving their problems in a valuable way? Well, you know that you're solving customers' problems in a valuable way when they open their wallet for your product or service. And so it starts to create these really interesting virtual cycles and feedback loops that hopefully propel growth.
Hmm. Hmm. I feel like there's so much to this, and it's super interesting. I guess, like, when you are doing this, do you start to think about, like, okay, we're gonna, like, I imagine you're also thinking about building out a team too, right?
I am.
So how has that process been?
It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Talent is it's stretched thin, I think, is what I would say,
Mhm.
especially in the Columbus market. And what I mean by that is that we have um, right now we have the pendulum swinging in all sorts of directions as far as the startup ecosystem is concerned, and really the product ecosystem, as we've seen product as a discipline develop in Columbus. So a lot of great product people have found great teams to work for. And so here are these new guys on the block, Battleface. And we're like, hey, we want some product managers. We want a product designer. Come join our team. And, the people at Root and Beam and Olive and all of the other great product organizations, a lot of them drive portfolio organizations that are in Columbus, are like, you know what, I'm good. I'm fine.
Hmm.
I'm good where I'm at. Um, There's also, frankly, a challenge with diversity in the available talent pool, and that's something that is hugely important. So it's hugely important, full stop. Diversity is important for every organization on the planet for all sorts of reasons. I would say that it's especially important for a global travel insurance company because it's impossible for me to build products to protect people who don't look like me and don't have the lived experience that I have and don't live in countries that I that I live in. And so, finding not only a candidate pool in general, but a diverse candidate pool is incredibly challenging in Columbus right now. I'm also hiring, I'm going to be spinning up another product team in the United Kingdom. And I have no connections like these sorts of connections in the United Kingdom. So we're basically starting from scratch as far as figuring out how to build out that candidate pool as well.
Wow. So one thing I kind of want to go back to, you're sort of talking about objectives, North Star and stuff too. I want to ask sort of, what do you think is the biggest mistake that a startup can make around product?
Well, I think you intuited it.
Mm,
I think it's not having the right structure in place to know whether you're succeeding or failing, and
mm,
ultimately whom you're helping and why. So, any product team that I've joined, whether it's a startup or a more established organization, it's crucial to understand not only what, so if you're in a larger organization, you're probably a more contained product team, and you have a set of objectives, maybe you use OKRs, maybe you don't, but you probably have objectives and goals, but you're really understanding what the objectives are 2 levels up that form the context for what you're doing as an individual product team is super critical. And I see that missing a lot, even among established product teams. At a startup, if you don't have the broader context for what you're doing, well, that's when you get the different rowers on the boat rowing in different directions, and you just end up going in circles because no one's actually meaningfully moving the thing that matters. And I've seen that, unfortunately. I've seen, I've worked with leaders and organizations that were unwilling to externalize all of the things that I told you I've been working on externalizing at Battleface, and it just creates a lot of unfortunate confusion and friction within the organization that doesn't really need to be there. So I'd say really rallying the whole team, the whole organization around like, this is what matters and this is how you contribute to what matters, and making sure that the right I don't mean to say structure in the sense that it needs to be rigorous, but you know what I mean, making sure that you have the right structure in place to communicate that broadly and consistently. If that starts to fall down, then you're just, you start to thrash, unfortunately.
mm. I also don't want to just leave what you were just talking about with diversity too, because I think that's a challenge that a lot of product teams face. And I think like, I'd be curious to know like kind of how you think about like solving that, because that's like a super hard problem to solve inside an organization.
Yeah, and frankly, I'm, I'm that's not a problem that I think any one organization can effectively solve. We
Mm,
need to look deeper within our communities. We need to look deeper within our organizations and see, not only how can we tease out great product talent across the board, but how can we also empower younger generations of people to recognize careers in technology, to recognize careers in product, that's a valuable and viable career path for them. I think it's something that excuse me, I think that's something that Columbus is going to be working on for a long time,
mm,
frankly. So, the best that I can do. Well, actually, I won't say it's the best that I could do, the best that I know how to do. And I welcome the wisdom of the community to help me figure out how to do this better. The best that I know how to do right now is to, make sure that as we try to build up a candidate pool for this, that we provide adequate time, we reach out to partners in the ecosystem, we reach out to different avenues that people might find to or use to find jobs, and make sure that we're giving people every opportunity to find this opportunity, and build out as a diverse candidate pool as I possibly can, so that from a selection process, I can make the best decision that I possibly can. But ultimately, we need to be getting earlier into the talent development life cycle, I guess, of product folks, and curating talent earlier on. Because, frankly, if I'm being 100% honest with everyone here, the majority of the product community in Columbus looks, well, not like me. They don't have crazy grizzly beard, long hair, but they're, you know, white men. And that's unfortunate. It's just an unfortunate reality.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're kind of touching on, you know, the something like in the founder world. Sometimes they talk about founder market fit. You almost kind of talked about like product manager market fit in a sense because you're having a product that's diverse in sense of communities and geography and,
Right.
you know, ethnicity, all of that stuff, right? But I'm interested too to talk about kind of, you know, one of the things you focus on with your product is kind of how do you create products in a way that is ethical and like, you know, I guess like on some level I feel like that means you're doing philosophy as well, but like how do you start to think about like approaching like building a product in a way that's ethical?
Man, I love that you brought philosophy back into it. And ethics is actually near and dear to my heart. And you know, so let me give you a very real example, even with battleface of the kind of integrity that I think demonstrates the kind of ethics that you need to have in product. And we could probably spend another 2 hours talking on this, so I'll try not to go too far off the deep end, but ethics in product is something that I'm deeply passionate about because we don't talk about it enough as a community. But so battleface as a company, we have had a product, we've had travel insurance in the United States since before I joined the organization. So certainly November, December, I don't know exactly, if I'm being honest, when we had this product available. As we have an eye toward growth, and as we established a marketing budget, as we worked with our head of growth to figure out what our growth trajectory in the United States looks like, I mean, the thing to do, right, would be, well, let's advertise. Let's get people to buy our product in the United States. No one knows that we exist in the United States, so let's try to get it in front of people. Meanwhile, we have sales in the United Kingdom taking off. And so as we explored this, and a big question that I had as I joined the team, you know, like, why aren't we promoting this product more? Why aren't we getting traction in the United States? Was that, frankly, it wasn't the right product. It wasn't the right product for consumers. If we asked the question internally, would you recommend this product to your friend? The answer was no. And the reason was it lacked, it took us longer to get COVID coverage than we would have liked. That was literally it. It was just, you know, this will not cover you if you catch COVID. But we weren't satisfied with that. And so we made the decision that was right for our customers, the ethical decision, to say, we're not going to promote this product because we don't want people to get confused. We don't want a bunch of people buying this thinking that they're covered for COVID, and then they're in a bad spot. It's ethics in product is all about the quality of the decisions that you make when observed through the lens of the longitudinal impact to your customers. And I think longitudinal there is a really important way to frame up the impact to customers, because I mean, we could have sold the US product. We could have given US consumers some peace of mind, like some short-term peace of mind, by having this product, protecting them on their trip. But then if they, you know, had some incident related to COVID and they filed a claim with us and it was denied because we didn't have the COVID coverage in place, well, that longitudinally, that would have been awful for consumers. And that's not a road that we were willing to travel. And so I think that ultimately, considering what value do your customers expect, and are you in a position to actually deliver upon that value, is the basis for ethical decisions in product.
It's super interesting. And I think it kind of relates back to the purpose of a business. And we were kind of talking about this a little bit before around, you know, well, what is the purpose of a business? Is it, you know, making money? And I think you pointed out that ultimately it's to solve a problem for the customer, right?
Right.
And I think, you know, it's interesting how sometimes, you know, especially with product management, there's business objectives and it may somewhat, you know, add pressure into creating a product that is, you know, on a certain timeline or has a certain feature set. So how important do you think it is to kind of, keep that as a focus when you work in product management?
Well, to go back to a business's purpose, I think that a business's purpose is to create value. And by that, I mean create value holistically. So create value for everyone that exists within the circumference of that product. So, the consumers get value out of it, the business gets value out of it, because there's an equitable value exchange between whatever you're getting out of the product and the price that you pay, all of the market dynamics that that go into that. So, when looking at the lens of the purpose of a business being to create value, both for, well, not just both, but for consumers, for the community, of course, for the people involved in the business. I think that if you take that as this is why a business exists, then naturally, maybe not the best decisions, but the right decisions fall into place. So if you have, everything's a trade-off in a business, and even more so in a startup. You're making more trade-off decisions in a day than maybe established companies are making in a month or a quarter. But the trade-off decisions ultimately have to be about, well, what's ultimately going to create the most value for the consumers in a way that makes sense for the broader community. And if we do that right, then consumers will give us money to provide them with that product or provide them with that service. So all other considerations, I think, kind of fall out from that more foundational notion of why business should exist in the first place.
Gotcha. Excuse me. So I want to talk a little bit more too about setting up this product organization, and I'm curious to know, I don't know to what extent you are a tools guy or what tools or systems you need to put in place to have a good product management practice. What is your thought on that in the context of a startup?
Yeah, so I'm a tools guy to an extent. I'm a tools guy to the extent that the tool actually lightens the cognitive load associated with my having to do something or remember something. So I tend to outsource a lot of my brain.
Hmm.
Um, just in the sense that I don't want to have to go through the effort of having to remember something in the moment, or, the friction that's involved in forgetting something. So, like the most effective tool in my toolbox as a product person, quite frankly, is writing stuff down.
Hmm.
And there are all sorts of great tools out there that make things easier to write things down, which I know sounds absurd, but there's, so like Lucas, I know I saw that you use Word because you wrote these questions down on my Word. I've worked with Google Docs. I'm working with Encoda. I've worked with Notion. I worked with Microsoft. And there is actually a pretty big difference between these different tools that exist for writing things down. So I think that finding the right tool to write things down is actually really important. Beyond that, I think that we have, this may be a somewhat controversial opinion, but I think that we have, just as a species, where we're at in our life cycle as a civilization, we have a natural tendency to over tool our lives. And so especially as we think about, like, oh yeah, well, I had this at this other job and it made life super easy. Well, you're not solving the same problems that you solved at your last job. You're solving a new set of problems. So don't carry that baggage with you, which means don't carry those tools with you. I tend to stay really, really light on a tool set or a tool chain supporting product as a thing until there's just an insurmountable problem that can't be solved without technology.
Gotcha. Um, I want to like get some folks involved in the conversation too. I feel like, Derek has such a great experience with startups, insurance, all this stuff, and you're all kind of sitting in here listening. I would love to have you add some questions as well. Are there any questions over what we've gone over so far? Or it could be your own questions about product management. I see somebody unmuted. Joshua?
I had a question. Yeah, yeah. Earlier you said writing things down makes them real for the organization, and I think that was in the context of, like you said, two levels up, and then putting any person's decision making within the realm of a few other layers. Could you and since we were just talking about tooling, or lack thereof. Could you talk about, I guess, how you, not only maybe where you write things down, but how do those ideas make the rounds? Where are they available? And yeah, like what's the utility for other people of that writing?
It's
Could you talk
a
about
great
that a little bit?
Yeah, and we it's such a topical question because we literally just went through this at Battleface. So one of the things that I was working with the team on at Battleface was thinking through, like, yeah, I mean, quarters are an arbitrary construct, but they're valuable just in terms of time boxing things. So we were thinking, like, what are we going to do in Q2? What's our focus? What do we really need to do in order to be successful in Q2? And that's an important conversation because you need to know the hundreds of other things that you're not going to do because you're going to be focused on these 5 core activities, right? So we were talking about, well, what are we going to do in Q2? And what does it mean to be successful in Q2? And it would have been super easy to have a conversation about that, to have, I guess, what I would call an all hands meeting and maybe have a PowerPoint presentation and talk through with everyone, okay, this is what success looks like in Q2. Instead of just having a conversation, which is ephemeral and can be interpreted in all sorts of different ways, we took the time to write it down first. And as we had a conversation about what, excuse me, success looked like in Q2, we referenced this document that we had put together. And the reason that I say that it makes it real is that this is almost, psychological. But when you see something in print, that it has a permanence associated with it. And when you see something in print in a document as opposed to a presentation, it has even more permanence associated with it. It's like, okay, now I'm reading this in a book or a newspaper, even though this is it's a digital platform that I've written things down in. But using that as a launch pad for that conversation around what does success in Q2 look like, not only allowed us to have a very concrete conversation about very concrete things that were written down in ways that were completely unambiguous because our CEO is looking at the exact same stuff as our customer service representatives. We also have a source of truth that is persistent, that we can refer back to, and that we can change as we learn more about, as we inevitably will, about what we need to do in the next 2 weeks or 3 months to achieve our objectives. Does that help?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I was interested in, you mentioned the CEO and the CSR. You said we were writing. I was wondering who the we was. And I was also wondering if, I definitely agree with what or have experienced that sort of like making things real, but if also, if there was sort of availability for for change, for versioning and for editing. You can't really it's hard to version other people's ideas. But putting something down into a document, you can start to collage, cut, paste, kill, and take things out, and it's just text. You can always undo, or you can go back. So I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about what the did you just like get the doc fired up and you're like, oh, that's it, perfect, or what was that process like?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of the conversations that I have with teams, just generally, whether it's an executive team or an engineering team or a product team, usually uses a document as a foundation. And sometimes that document is half-baked, sometimes it's fully baked, sometimes it's a template that we jam out on together. So I don't think that there's necessarily a one-size-fits-all answer to your question, but the mutability, the editability of the documents, I think, is also really important. And that's one of the things I absolutely love about modern document tools like Coda, like Google Docs, et cetera, is that they can be highly collaborative. Anyone can edit them. Anyone can move things around. Anyone can add ideas. So you really have this source of truth that is the synthesis of all the different perspectives that you need in order to be successful.
Great questions, great answers. So there's one that came into the chat from Han Pham. I hope I said your name correctly. You feel free to unmute and ask your question if you want, or I can read it out.
Yes, I can unmute. Sorry, I didn't know if it was working.
It's all good.
Yeah, and it is Han Pham. So my question to you, Derek, thank you for sharing your, your knowledge and your experience on product management. So I wanted to touch on documentation and product transparency. So, as a startup, is your team currently utilizing agile methodologies or Are you in the phase of becoming a Scrum team and utilizing tools like Jira or Trello to break down like the deliverables and kind of, create that space where everything is there? If that makes sense.
It does make sense. Yeah. And that's a great question. In the interest of full disclosure, as I answer that question, I'm not a fan of frameworks. I'm not a fan of frameworks like Scrum, if I'm being totally honest. I'm not a fan of capital A Agile. My opinion is that those tend to lead to execution and innovation theater rather than driving real results. Again, that's something that we could probably spend a whole lot of time thinking and talking through.
I feel like you just opened up a whole can.
I may not be very popular in some circles, depending on how far this recording circulates or who's participating that I can't see. But I think, and let me know if I'm not touching on the spirit of your question. I think that one of the great things about lowercase a Agile and Scrum in theory is that what it seeks to do is ensure that engineers are empowered and that they are connected to actual customer problems and in an observable way connected to delivering value to customers. I think that that's the spirit of those things. And you don't need capital A Agile and you don't need Scrum in order to connect your engineers to value or empower them to make decisions. And so when I think about the composition of our product teams and our team in general, I tend to think of product teams very, very broadly in the sense that, like the CTO with whom I work very closely is a member of the product team, not in the sense that he reports to me. That would be preposterous if a CTO reported to a director of product, but we're all a part of the same team that are working relentlessly on delivering value to our customers. So we're all a part of a product team, as are his engineers. The vast majority of engineering teams that I've worked with have been in organizations that were of very much the same mind. Like, we're going to connect the engineers to the product folks, the product designer, the product manager, the product analyst, if you have them. And we're going to make sure that that entire team is not only empowered to make decisions that are in the best interest of the customer and the business, but we're also going to provide them with pathways to connect directly with customers. And I think that's the important thing. So again, hopefully that isn't too much of a, hopefully I didn't dodge your question too much, but I think that's the spirit of what you're asking, maybe.
No, you definitely didn't dodge my question.
Okay, cool.
Your take on it is definitely interesting, because when you talk about product management, a lot of times I hear about agile methodologies and Scrum teams. So I don't want to open a can of worms here and continue the conversation. But yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So I saw one came in from Jake Larger. I don't know if that's how you say your last name, but Jake, do you want to unmute and answer or ask your question? I'll go ahead and read it. So the question is, in a scenario when developing 2 or 3 products that take a few years to develop and scale with same market sizes available, is there a best practice route forward to analyze which product should receive funding?
Wow, that's a big question. Is that in the chat? I may need to read.
That is in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah. No. It's
I think it's like
really
which
question.
Yeah, like which product do you go after and how do you make decisions around like prioritizing, I guess, new product launches?
Yeah. And I mean, when we're talking about new product launches and new products, all other things being equal. So I think if I'm parsing your question correctly, you're talking about 2 different products that may have the same relative level of effort with the same relative level of opportunity associated with them. honestly, with any product development effort, you're making a bet, right? I mean, that's why venture capital exists, because you're making a bet that a product that's in its very early stages is going to succeed based off very, very limited information about the time, excuse me, the team, the market opportunity, their unique capability to bring this to market. I mean, I would bring that same mentality, I guess, into this sort of scenario. I'm trying not to index too hard on it's going to take 2 or 3 years to bring these products to market. So if you're talking about digital products, you could probably bring something to market a lot more quickly than that. But I mean, the best practice would be, I think, just figuring out, are there opportunities to de-risk as quickly as possible the success or failure of these products, line those up, and figure out which one you can get to fail quickest. I guess, because if you can convince yourself quickly that something is going to fail, that's probably a lot more valuable than, so like if I can do something in 2 weeks that will tell me that this 2 to 3 year effort is definitely going to fail, versus the alternative, it would take me 6 months to figure out whether it's going to succeed, I would take the 2 weeks to fail anytime, because then I know I could just bail on it. I don't know if that helps. That's a really interesting question. I think that if there were a good answer to that question, we would have a lot more successful venture capitalists in the world.
Hey, Derek, thanks for answering that. My bad, I was muted there when reading off the question.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. Great question, Jake, and great answer, Derek. So this one, David Lambert, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. I'll take a shot at recapturing that. I'm just looking for some thoughts on reinvention. You've been through a couple of different flavors of insurance, and there's a lot of what I'd consider mental inertia in insurance about what product looks like. And kind of wondering, in terms of creating and cultivating a culture of reinventing, is that something that you can grow within an organization, or are we kind of perpetually doomed to blowing up industries from the outside?
Man, that's such a good question. And no, so I don't think that the answer is that we are doomed to perpetually blowing up industries from the outside. And that's an awesome way to characterize that. I think that if you're talking about like legacy company reinvention, like building what I would call more traditional organizations into product organizations, maybe what a lot of folks have heard referred to as digital transformation. I think that, that needs to start with the executive team. Frankly, I did a brief stint as a consultant, and I can tell you that it did not go well. Well, I don't know, maybe it was because of me. I just think the organization holistically wasn't ready for the kind of change that we were trying to engender. But that's because, frankly, the kind of change that we were trying to engender was growing up within the IT organization rather than being a truly executive initiative. So I think it is absolutely possible for companies and organizations to reinvent themselves within the realm of product, but I think that that's something that has to start with executive endorsement, either with the CEO becoming a chief product officer or the company having a chief product officer, and making sure that there's an opportunity for real change to cascade throughout the organization. Otherwise, I think we're going to continue to see more external disruption where organizations have far too much perceived or real inertia really to evolve.
Have you run into organizations where you've got an executive team kind of preaching that message, and then there's an air gap between them and the rest of the organization?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I think that the change of the kind of magnitude that I think you're referring to is super scary for middle managers, super scary for people who are literally like, my job is to manage people and tasks. So the kind of change that we need to see in organizations for them really to reinvent themselves in a product capacity, really shifts this whole notion of I am going to manage people as resources, and I'm going to manage people as numbers in the boxes that they help tick. And this is a gross oversimplification. I don't mean this to be disparaging of any individual. It's just what I've seen to be kind of characteristic of these large legacy organizations. It requires, you know, this reframing of middle management to people empowerment, and how am I going to develop and grow people to be the best that they possibly can be. You know, if I'm being honest, not everyone's cut out for that. Some people don't survive that transition professionally, and it's unfortunate, but it's something that happens. And so that's where I see some of that start to break down, is when you have, you know, people really just kind of fighting for their positions in a company.
Good stuff. Good thoughts. Good question. Good answer. James Brinza, do you want to ask your question?
Sure thing. Hey, Derek, good to see you again. It's been
Good
quite
to
a
see you.
while.
Yeah.
I see COVID doubled the length of your beard, and it added a beard to my face.
I know. Looking
and
good.
made it white. What the heck? Hey, I'm just curious. So as you talk about startups a lot, I always find it very comical. Everybody wants to see the 3-year product roadmap, the 3-year financial projections. And let's face it, as a startup, especially with bootstrap, and you're swinging from the vines, you're fighting for survival.
Yeah.
And I phrased the question on business agility, and I do absolutely mean lowercase a on that business agility. But trying to be nimble versus balancing that really long-term product roadmap. What have you seen that's been really effective to make that happen?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, 3-year product roadmaps that talk, especially within a startup context, I think it's a little bit different once you start getting into larger organizations with more runway. But within a startup context, a 3-year product roadmap is fiction. It is, but it's a visionary fiction, and it's a fiction that actually has a purpose, I think, in that it provides you with a frame of reference for what an aspirational state could look like, and ultimately helps frame up targets and objectives that can be meaningfully chunked up into, well, okay, now that I know what 2025 should look like, I can work backwards from that and figure out what does Q3 of 2022 need to look like to be on the path towards making that real. And so I think especially in a startup context, insofar as you can look at a 3-year roadmap as something that is aspirational and a visionary state of a hypothetical future world, it can add value to near to midterm strategic and tactical planning. But it is absolute fiction.
So Karen asked a question. Karen, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hey, Derek, this is Karen.
Hey, Karen. Hi.
How are you doing?
Good.
So I've talked to many, different organizations, even startups, and there's, at least the ones I've talked to a lot of them seem to be very timeline driven over the expense of value, meaning there's a lot of stress on just get it out there, just get it done. Just do it, without really asking, hey, have we even defined the problem? Do we even understand what the problem is? What have you found the best way to kind of address that kind of mindset?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a really pithy one, and you know, I mean, there are two kind of competing mindsets, especially in a startup context, that you have to take. I mean, so one thing that you have to acknowledge when you're in a startup is that urgency matters.
Yeah.
You know, if a set of things aren't true about battleface in 6 months or 9 months, then the likelihood of battleface ceasing to exist as a company increases a lot. Or if certain things are true in 6 to 9 months about battleface, then the likelihood of battleface existing for 3 to 5 years increases quite a bit. And so, yeah, I think timelines and urgency are a critical component to working in a startup, and the ability to make right enough decisions right now based off of a limited amount of information is really important. Now, that being said, I think I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth for a minute, because in and amidst all of that urgency and all of that frenetic chaos, it's also equally important that you make time and space for really intentional focused work, so that you can start planting seeds and placing longer term bets that ultimately feed into a broader strategy that may or may not be so time bound. So for instance, just to make this real, I have right now, there are things that I know that I must get done within this week, so that I can frame up deliveries, product deliveries, like stuff that we're going to ship to customers within the next 2 to 3 weeks. That stuff must ship within the next 2 to 3 weeks, so that we can convince ourselves that certain things are true. Namely, that we're on the right trajectory to achieve the objectives that we've laid out in our product strategy, which has a 3 to 6 month time horizon, which ultimately feeds into this broader goal that we have for 2021. And sorry for, like the stream of consciousness, just stuff cascading into other things. But I think that's the really delicate balance between, near term startup, we have to make this thing happen now, to like longitudinally, these are the results that we want to see. And both of them exist very chaotically in the same continuum, especially in early stage startups.
So are you saying that in some cases that you'll put things out there, may not necessarily know if it is going to achieve the results or the value that you're anticipating, and then you may shift direction based on what you find out?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. At this stage, right now, the stuff that we're working on probably has like a 50-50 chance of success or
Okay.
failure. And if we as a team took the time to de-risk those so that they had an 80% chance of success or a 90% chance of success, we probably could have shipped 3 things in the time that it took to provide us with greater certitude. So
Okay.
a lot of that balance is around expected value and figuring out, like what are we going to get out of further research, for example, versus what are we going to leave on the table by not doing this thing.
That's interesting. So do you ship the feature as part of the product, and then if it doesn't work, you yank it out and do something different?
In that sort of context, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. That's interesting.
Yeah. Now that may not work in all environments. Certainly,
Yeah, sure.
If we were working on enterprise software, I think that I would certainly have a different sort of answer to that question. But as we're talking about direct to consumer, selling travel insurance to people around the world, that sort of approach certainly is effective.
Okay.
Good question. Any other questions? We have about 3 more minutes, and feel free to unmute too. Don't feel like you just have to write it into. Oh, we got another one from David. How do you balance experimentation with a customer perception of stability? Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm kind of shooting for there is if you are trying stuff and failing fast, how do you keep that from not looking like schizophrenia?
Well, it's definitely a lot easier when you're working on a consumer business. So let me just say that outright, that I think that consumers expect a certain amount of volatility, especially in technology today. And in fact, consumer perception is that a digital product should continuously be improving. So that makes it, I don't want to trivialize it. That perception could certainly be betrayed, but it certainly gives you a lot more leniency working direct to consumer. I would say to some extent that's even starting to become true for B2B SaaS. So if you look at some of the even bigger B2B software as a service players, there's a lot of rapid experimentation going on, and a lot of, feature, maybe not thrashing, but certainly feature churn that we see, usually in, I would say, small to mid market B2B SaaS solutions, where again, they have some leniency with their users. In enterprise software, it's a whole different ball of wax. And the way that I've been successful there, I actually worked with Cover My Meds, working at Product and Cover My Meds. I was working with pharmacy benefits managers. So I'm sure you can imagine these were very change averse, very risk averse organizations. The only way that I found that we could really work in a spirit of experimentation was by collaborating with them and figuring out like, hey, how can we pilot this with a team within your organization and see if this drives results? And we always had to tie it back to, we think that if we do this, we're going to drive these results for your business. And there are some organizations that are open to that. There are lots of organizations that are not open to that. And finding that balance is really about building the right relationships with the right customers, and a lot of clever feature flagging within the product itself.
Wow. Wow. This was such a great conversation. A lot of really good questions, and I appreciate that. That's always awesome when we get an audience that has a lot of questions. I think it speaks to the quality of the audience and obviously the speaker as well. So thanks everybody for coming to Product Tank. Thank you, Derek. It was really fascinating to dive in and get some of your thoughts.
Thanks a lot for having me. Great seeing a lot of you. It's been a while. So thanks a lot for showing up.